Well, thank you very much. The strange bird here. But just to justify it a little bit, in my pre-Episcopal life, my area of research was actually the relationship between science and religion. So what I want to do is start from, if we want to communicate science to society, and I think that is part of a vocation of every single scientist, we need to understand the dynamics of society, of course. And here's my attempt in 3 parts. First, trust. When it comes to trust in science, specifically the lack of trust, as was mentioned here several times, Sweden seems to go against the tide. Swedish society has high levels of trust in general, and when it comes to research and researchers, Sweden last year displayed the highest levels of trust since monitoring started 20 years ago. This means that 61% of Swedes have high or relatively high trust in universities and university colleges. And when it comes to different disciplines, it turns out that we find highest levels of trust in research in medicine. Some of you might know that we had this Macchiarini affair at Karolinska Institute last year, and that entailed a dip, but it recovered fairly quickly. Technology and natural science also has high levels, less trust in social science, education science, and alas, the humanities. And highly educated and younger people show higher levels of trust than less educated and older people. And the closer you live to university or university college, the higher your trust is. Hence, you also see differences between urban and rural population. And when it comes to political interest, Greens have the highest trust in science. 83% say high and very high. And right-wing populists have the lowest. Only 45% say high. And 14% say we have very little trust in science. Research in heart and lung disease and in the environment were deemed to be the most urgent things to do. Less urgent, or least urgent actually, philosophy, and space science. And nanotechnology had the highest level of people saying, I have no opinion. And my interpretation of that would be, trust depends to a certain degree on the closeness to university, and is also related to what resonates with one's own experience. There is this is about me factor in it. That is why heart and lung disease, very high, and environment, but space science less so. And I don't think this is about some kind of fuzzy irrationality. Rather, I think it's about the possibility of getting involved. It's about a me bubble, for better or worse. And this, of course, in our time is amplified by culture, the culture of social media. Sometimes I think we see a more bubblification than publication in these days, because it all ends up in this me bubble rather than in this interdisciplinary publication. The World Values Survey says that Sweden is almost off the chart, way up in the right upper corner, displaying a maximum of secular rational values and self-expression. Nevertheless, the populist package has vigorous supporters in Sweden as well, and it manifests itself in an unholy trinity of being anti-migrant, anti-climate, and anti-feminism or gender justice. It's accompanied by alternative facts and anti-science attitudes. For example, in social media, climate engagement is almost depicted as a kind of sect behavior, requiring that climate skeptics, or whatever they call it, be given equal space in public media or so on. So formal and theoretical trust in science does not necessarily translate into practical trust in the processes and results of science. The problem I see is the world is drunk. In all too many countries, people are sipping from a cocktail made of 5 dangerous ingredients, 5 poisonous peas, as it were: polarization, populism, protectionism, post-truth, and patriarchy. And this poison affects science, religion, and society, because polarization tears apart what should belong together and work together. Populism pits people and so-called elites, all of us here, against each other. And protectionism puts, of course, one's own country, one's own people, and one's own interest first at the expense of the common good. And post-truth is the contempt of truth that disfigures the vital triad of the truth, the good, and the beautiful that we can't live without. And patriarchy continues to deprive the world of the full flourishing of children and women, and in the end dehumanizes both women and men. So what do we need? I guess we need a lot more literacy. Literacy in science, literacy in philosophy, hermeneutics, literacy in theology, both factual knowledge and spiritual knowledge, spiritual practice. And I think we need to attend to the basic and cross-cutting dynamics of fear versus hope. Because these 5 Ps are actually driven by fear, and behind them looms the question of hope. And so we need to acknowledge the fears there are, analyze them both in factual and emotional categories, and ask, what does this constant appeal to fear, also nurtured by social media, do to the collective nervous system of societies? Usually these things make us defensive, opposed to change, prone to rigidity, and then they feed anew into this vicious cycle of 5 Ps. It may in fact require a trauma-sensitive communication of science, because we need to foster the ability to engage constructively with alterity, the other, with complexity, with empathy, and with accountability. So what we need to do is to create a framework for also for ethical reasoning. Although science and technology often seem to exceed our ability to handle ethical issues as well as legislation, as some speakers have pointed out here, I think there are 3 keywords that are useful. Namely, we need to create a framework of resilience, coexistence, and hope. With the framework of resilience, we will be able to make sense of the fights of women and men for the health, well-being, and future of their children. We will also be able to make sense and meaning of necessary sacrifices. And we will be able to confront the trends and powers that hamper our constructive engagement with the greatest challenges of our time, namely confront polarization, resist populism, counteract protectionism, and fight against post-truth and overcome patriarchy. With a framework of coexistence, we will be able to revisit some of the borders that are harmful to our working and living together, maybe as scientists, as theologians, or just as people. And we will be able to foster more adequate views of nature and be in a more effective position to address climate change in a holistic way, and also more eager to hear the stories of those who are suffering and will be suffering from the degradation of their environments and livelihoods, and be better at hearing the voices of indigenous peoples. And with a framework of hope, finally, there is reason to expect change. change of minds, metanoia with a theological word, must still be possible. It must be possible to counter narratives of hate and fear with narratives of love and hope, because this world is crying out for credible words of hope. And there's an appeal to scientists in this, credible words of hope, and, of course, the works of love that faith compels us to carry out, the Pope spoke about yesterday, and to do that together with people of goodwill from many traditions. And I think if we do this, if we build up this framework of resilience, coexistence, and hope, we will be able to do some great stuff when it comes to have transformative practice, when it comes to science in society. Thank you.